Doing this for a while. We're thrilled to have you all join us. We've received countless questions from people around Cook County who have joined in via Twitter through the hashtag of TellTony, T-E-L-L-T-O-N-I, and feel free to join us now and submit your questions online, and we'll be able to hear from the President directly to see what's going on in Cook County, the good things we've gotten done, the good things that we have going forward. So join us. We are here tonight, by the way, at the Microsoft Technology Center, at the Aon Center. We are very pleased to have them here as our host for the evening to make this all possible. And we'll be here until 8:15 tonight answering questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But before we do that, I'd like to turn this over to our Cook County Board President, Tony Freckwinkle.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm very grateful to Commissioner Fritchie and to Microsoft for hosting the event tonight. And as Commissioner Fritchie said, I'm joined by my Chief of Staff, Kurt Summers, and our Budget Director, Andrea Gibson. You know, I think it's really important to take advantage of whatever opportunities are available to help people learn more about their government, in our case, county government. And I'm even willing to do this kind of event. I tell you, it's a little bit outside of my comfort zone. I'm a person who has a cell phone that only makes phone calls. So you can tell that I'm a person probably of a different generation than many of you out there. But I'm willing, as Commissioner Fritchie said, to help our citizens keep in touch with their elected officials and keep informed by their elected officials in any way that's available to us. And we're encouraging county residents to be engaged in every possible way. On Thursday, 2 days from now, we'll be holding our first public hearing at 6:30 in the evening at 69 West Washington. 6:30 in the evening at 69 West Washington. So those of you who'd like to come down and see us in person and talk to us and share your concerns can do that then, as well as those of you who would like to interact with us tonight. We want to try to give you an understanding of county government, in particular our $3.1 billion budget. I know that many of you have questions about our resources and how we spend our money, and we'd be happy to try to answer those tonight. We've worked hard over the last 8 months to try to be fiscally responsible, to try to bring good new leaders to the county to help us do our work, to be as transparent and accountable as we possibly can. And in that enterprise, we've had wonderful cooperation and support from Commissioner Fritchie. He's made this kind of a hallmark of our cooperative relationship, and we've worked hard to try to improve services. I know we got started a little later than we expected, and I think now that I'd like to go to the questions.
Then let's do that. Let's start off with this. I think it's an interesting question. As a lot of people know, in addition to yourself and the county commissioners, we have a number of other elected officials: the assessor, the treasurer, the clerk of
sheriff,
the court,
the state's attorney.
And you know, we talk about sharing the sacrifice and sharing the pain. Have you been satisfied so far with the level of cooperation that you've gotten from the other elected officials in helping deal with our budget deficits?
When we walked in the door in December of last year, we were already in the beginning of the first quarter, which is a terrible way to do budgeting. We didn't have a draft budget, and we prepared over the next 60 days a budget which the Board of Commissioners, as you know, approved unanimously at the very end of February. But that doesn't make good sense. And this year we've proceeded in a quite different way with the help and support of Andrea Gibson, our Budget Director, a very talented person whom we stole from the city. And let her tell us a little bit about the budget process this year. Andrea?
Sure. Thank you. Well, the budget process, we're changing it a little bit this year. In June, the President issued an executive order requiring a preliminary budget by the end of July to outline the scope of the problem that we're dealing with going into 2012. We did that on July 27th, and now we're working to solve that gap. And we're looking forward to ideas from our departments, other elected officials, and also the public on ways to do that. So the preliminary budget was the first step in the budget process. And I believe last year the magnitude was $487 million in a gap, and this year it's $315 million that we're trying to solve. The executive order that the President signed in June also requires the budget to be submitted to the Board of Commissioners by the end of October so that we have an opportunity to have a budget in place by the beginning of the fiscal year.
Very good. And I think it's worth noting, though, that we've been able to reduce the deficit so far while rolling back the sales tax that people were very understandably unhappy about. So while they're seeing increases at the state level in income tax at the city level and various taxes. Under your leadership, we've been able to start to take this in the right direction. We've got another question here from Jennifer, who submitted this via the Tell Tony website, and this was about Provident Hospital, as far as what the future is of Provident Hospital, and whether you see closing it like Oak Forest or having it restructured in some way.
Well, first of all, there's an independent governing board for our healthcare system, and they put together a strategic plan, which they published a little more than a year ago. So before we ever came in office, there was a strategic plan in place for our healthcare system, and we have begun to implement that strategic plan this fiscal year. What it calls for is transforming Oak Forest, which was a facility that provided long-term care for people, mainly, into a regional outpatient center that provides primary care and specialty care. And specialty care is just cardiologists, people who help you if you have heart problems, orthopedics, people who help you if you have broken bones or brittle bones, any kind of specialty. And we've refocused Oak Forest, and we're about to refocus Provident in the same way, to make it a center of primary and specialty care mainly, with an emergency room and a small number of hospital beds that support the emergency room. So both Oak Forest and Provident are being transformed into regional outpatient centers where you can get primary and specialty care. And our principal inpatient facility will now be Stroger Hospital in the medical complex on the west side of Chicago. And the other inpatient facility we have is CERMAC, but that serves the jail population. So inpatient services will be concentrated and consolidated at Stroger Hospital on the west side.
Very good. And I'd like to remind our viewers that they can submit questions via Twitter. Just use the hashtag TellTony, TELLTONI, at any time to submit your questions. We have a question from Marcel that came across on Twitter. You mentioned that Andrea had come across from the city, and he asked, on a related note, how the city and county can work together in tight budget times, if you have any specifics of things that the city and county can do to consolidate.
Well, I'm very grateful to Mayor Emanuel because shortly after he was elected, he and I sat down for lunch, and one of the things we talked about was the importance of working together. And I can't say that it never happened before, but in recent times, there hasn't been any cooperation between the city and the county. And both of us felt that that was very important, that we work on cooperative efforts, collaboration, and consolidation. And actually, Kurt, my chief of staff, has been the kind of point person on the city-county collaborative, and I'd like to ask him to kind of speak to that.
Sure. Well, Commissioners, you know, having sat on the City-County Collaborative, one of 7 members of the team that helped advise the mayor and the county board president, there were 19 items that came up for current and future opportunities to consolidate operations and services to serve the people of the city of Chicago and Cook County more broadly better. A couple to highlight that we'll begin to see an impact in 2012. One of those is procurement. As you might imagine, City of Chicago and Cook County operate some similar functions, and in those functions, we buy some of the same goods. Examples of that are asphalt or salt or even copy paper. And what we've already started to do as a result of the work of the City-County Collaborative is look at joint purchasing opportunities. We've entered into joint purchasing contracts to find savings for the benefit of taxpayers. In addition to that, you'll see in the 2012 budgets for both the city and the county an impact on revenue. We have an expectation that if both of our revenue departments begin to share data together, we can spend less money trying to collect taxes, and in fact, we can collect more revenue, which puts less of a burden on taxpayers. So those are a couple of the opportunities we'll see in 2012, and there's more to come.
We've got some good questions coming through here. Let's take on an issue that a lot of people have been talking about, and that's the pension system. We've been reading about pension problems at the state level, city level. We've got it at the county level as well. Do you have any thoughts on things that can be done to reform the pension system?
Well, let me speak to pensions. I've been a city employee for the last 19 years, and for the last little less than a year, I've been a county employee. So I speak from personal experience. You know, what's happened over time is that government employees kind of made a deal. And the deal was that the salaries were not going to be comparable to the private sector, but you would get good benefits. You'd get good health care, you'd get a good pension. That was kind of the unwritten agreement between government workers and government. But what happened over time, largely, frankly, because of the success of union organizing, is that salaries went up and we still had generous benefits as government employees. Now we're in a situation where those generous benefits are extraordinarily expensive to government, and we are paying salaries that are closer and closer to being comparable in the private sector. So the deal kind of between government employees and government has broken down a little bit as salaries have risen. So it ends up now that government employees have probably more generous benefits than people in the private sectors. They have defined benefit pension programs. They have very generous health care. And that's less and less the case in the private sector. There really aren't many private sector companies or corporations that provide the kind of health care benefits that government workers have or the generous pensions. So we have to kind of renegotiate the deal with government workers. And frankly, my view is that government workers are going to have to pay more, and we're going to have to figure out how we can make our pension system sustainable over the long term. And one of the ways, I believe, as somebody who's been a government employee for 20 years, is that we as employees are going to have to pay more if we want the same kind of generous benefits that we've had in the past. Or we're going to have to change the systems, 401k systems, defined contribution programs rather than defined benefit programs that are prevalent in the private sector. So we've got some work to do on pensions, and I think that the city and the state are looking at this issue as well, and over the next several years, there's likely to be pension reform legislation in Springfield that will impact all of us.
And I think, having spent 14 years down in Springfield, I know this is something that we've talked about for years and years, and with your time in the city council, it's an issue that's not going to go away, but I think everybody realizes now that something's going to have to change along the way.
Right. There's the boomer wave, of which I'm part, a big bulge in the population that's coming close to retirement now, and it's going to be retiring over the next several decades. And we want to be sure that our pension systems are able to provide benefits to, all of our workers, not just the folks who are near retirement, but those who are just entering government service.
We've got another question online. Somebody was talking about whether the sales tax that was put in place by Todd Stroger would have balanced the budget had it still been in place.
No, actually, our present deficit is $315 million. That's right, Andrea?
Correct.
And 53 million of it results from the decrease in the sales tax. So 250 million plus is a structural deficit that we have to deal with.
And I think you've been leading the way through reform and streamlining, like Kurt was talking about, and other processes that Andrea was talking about, and figuring out how we can find these savings through streamlining while trying to keep money in people's pockets these days, which is what you're doing through the repeal of the sales tax or the rollback of the sales tax.
Right, and let me just say, credit where credit is due. The Board of Commissioners approved unanimously the rollback, so I'm very grateful. What I said during the campaign, what I still believe is that the sales tax was the increase in the sales tax of 1% was an extraordinary burden to ordinary working families and to businesses, particularly businesses on the periphery of the county, who had to compete with businesses in Lake or Kane or Will or DuPage or compete with Indiana that had much lower sales tax. Andrea, do you want to talk about some of the things we might try to do to reduce the $315 million gap?
Well, we've just received the budget requests in from departments, so the first order of business is to look everywhere throughout the budget to see where we can reduce costs, where we can streamline operations. It's too soon to identify the specific plans, but that's our focus right now. We're not looking at the revenue side of the equation as a first order of business.
We're looking at efficiencies and streamlining.
Right.
Okay.
And I think it's safe to say, too, that in your experience and mine, I don't think we've ever seen this much attention being given to where can we cut back as opposed to where can we find more revenue coming in.
Right. In these terrible times, I don't think it's fair to go back to the taxpayers and say, you're going to have to absorb, greater tax increases. We've got to be fair to the good people who support government, and we've got to figure out ways to tighten our own belt rather than look for additional resources. And by the way, Kurt has corrected me. On the vote on the sales tax, it was 12-5. The budget was passed unanimously, but the decrease in the sales tax, the vote was 12-5.
I think that budget will be something that nobody will forget since we were there till about 4:30 in the morning.
Yes, that was quite a night.
Well, but you know, but we got it done, and you know, when you talk about giving credit where credit's due, I mean, President, your campaign was run in large part talking about rolling back and repealing the sales tax, and that really was among the first order of business, one of the cornerstones of getting that budget done. So I just want to commend you, and I think the taxpayers are probably happy too that you were quick to follow through on your word on that one.
Thank you.
Let me remind our viewers, too, that you can go on and ask and submit questions on Twitter via the hashtag #TellTony or through the chat function on your webpage. If you're watching this right now, just click the I am link and you can submit a question that way as well. Here's an interesting question, actually, that I think a lot of people have on their mind, and they probably only see this for the most part when they look at their property tax bill, and that is Wilburn, who wanted to know, what is the TB Sanitarium District? What do the employees in this area do? And is it true that there is a projected surplus of $21 million?
I'm going to let Andrea speak to this, but this is an example of a holdover from a former time, frankly. There was a time in this country when tuberculosis was rampant. It's a very contagious disease, but we've been able to check it, rein it in, partly through the use of penicillin and other drugs, and partly just changes in sanitation. But there was a time when tuberculosis was a terrible disease, and the taxpayers in Cook County were taxed to provide care for people who had tuberculosis. That's no longer the case. This is now a special fund that has considerable resources in it, a considerable surplus. I think you said $21 million. We spend some money out of this fund every year to care for people in our health system, the health and hospital system, who have tuberculosis. But it's a very modest part of that resource. And let me let Andrea speak to it more directly.
Sure. I would also like to point out they use some of the funds to do screenings and do some preventative work on tuberculosis. It's not just the inpatient tuberculosis patients. But this is an example of what we have in the county, a special purpose fund. So that is a type of fund that's self-supported by a revenue stream. So it's not, this fund may have a surplus of $21 million, but that doesn't mean that we can use it for other things. Other purposes. And most of the special purpose funds, this is one of 34, are outlined in state law and required to be used for certain things. We're looking through all of the special purpose funds and the enabling legislation to determine if we can work in Springfield to change definitions, broaden the scope to make it more applicable to today's environment.
Very good. I appreciate it. Another question just came in. Is talking about taxes. Is the county collecting all the taxes that are required to be collected? And I think, let me just add on to that question for you. I know one of the things that we had discussed when our collaboration efforts with the city was maybe trying to work together to streamline the costs of collecting those taxes, whether it's checking for cigarette taxes, whatever it may be. So how do you feel we're doing with getting our the taxes that we're supposed to be getting from people?
Well, one of the things we've talked about in the collaboration between the city and the county, which we addressed earlier, is trying to figure out how we can cooperate on enforcement. There are state taxes on cigarettes, there are county taxes on cigarettes, there are city taxes on cigarettes. So the enforcement arms of the city and the county and the state ought to be working together to be sure that, you know, if you're going out as a county revenue officer and checking on cigarette stamps, you should be sure that you inform people in the city and the state if you find somebody who's not paying those. Kurt, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the big opportunities that we have through collaboration is it's sort of a range of everything from sharing data to say, hey, we found a person who wasn't paying taxes, you should follow up with them too, to taking a step further, and this is one of the things that we're exploring. If a person is found delinquent in their taxes, in the city of Chicago, they shouldn't be able to apply for a county business license and vice versa. And it could go all the way up to the state. So there are opportunities through collaboration where the people who are avoiding the taxes can be pursued more aggressively, which would benefit, you know, the people who are playing by the rules.
Well, it takes pressure off all the other taxpayers as well. You know, especially when you look at the fact that, you know, obviously every taxpayer in Chicago is a taxpayer in Cook County as well.
Right.
It's a big part of our population, and if we can streamline that, we're going to get ourselves ahead of the game. because the last thing we need to be doing right now is leaving money, I think, on the table.
On the table.
It's supposed to be coming in there, and then we look at service cutbacks, et cetera, that, potentially could have been avoided.
Right.
You got a lot of good press lately and good praise lately, with respect to your comments and thoughts with respect to low-level marijuana arrests, enforcement of those laws. I think people may want to know just generally, looking at a couple of the questions here, your thoughts on, from a policy standpoint, where that plays into the issues of incarceration of youth, whether it's a disproportionate impact, whether it's money well spent to be prosecuting these cases. I think people may not realize that it's not just arresting somebody, but when they get arrested by a Chicago police officer or a municipal police officer, they wind up then in the county jail, dealing with the Cook County State's Attorney, the Cook County Sheriff at that point,
Cook County Public Defender.
The Cook County Public Defender. So the city's policy on enforcement of these types of laws really has a significant impact on the operations of Cook County and on Cook County taxpayers.
One of the first things that I talked to Mayor Rahm Emanuel about was the way in which city enforcement of these drug laws impacted the county. What we found out, actually, from talking to the state's attorney, was that for marijuana offenses of 10 grams or less, possession of 10 grams or less, these cases were routinely dismissed by the judges, routinely, and almost universally dismissed by the judges. So, somebody's arrested for a low-level marijuana charge. They may spend anywhere from, if they don't have bail, 5 to 21 days in jail. They go before a judge and the case is dismissed. Now, the police officer has spent a good deal of time doing all the paperwork to put somebody in the jail. As Commissioner Fritchie pointed out, the state's attorney has to go through with the case, even though they know that it'll be dismissed. The public defender's time is involved. And again, 5 to 21 days in jail. But we spend, as a county, almost $143 a day. I think it's $142.80 to keep somebody in the jail. Now, for low-level drug offenders who have their cases dismissed out anyway, we're spending $143 a day to keep them in jail for a case that's going to be thrown out. Furthermore, in addition to the people who are there for low-level possession charges, drug addiction impacts our criminal justice system in other ways. When I talked to the new superintendent, McCarthy, about this, one of the things he said was, it's not just the low-level drug offenders that show you the impact of addiction on our criminal justice system. It's cases of prostitution, of shoplifting, burglaries. In other words, people engage in other illicit activities, shoplifting, selling their bodies, burglary, to support their drug habits. So what I've said all along is we've got to figure out how we can deal as a society with addiction other than putting people in the criminal justice system, where they're not getting treated for their addiction and where it's tremendously expensive. Almost anything you do with a young person who comes with a low-level marijuana charge, if you help them by putting them in a drug program, if you help them by finding employment, if you help them by finding them a group home in which to sort of help them as they kind of straighten out their lives, any of those things are less expensive than keeping somebody in jail and provide them with treatment and assistance. So we've got to figure out how to deal with our addiction problems in this country as a public health crisis, which in my view it is, rather than a criminal justice issue. So that's what we're working towards, and we're trying to get the other actors in the criminal justice system to work together with us around this. And I should point out that we spend, as a county, almost $500 million a year on the jail. Just on the jail, $500 million. And we have a budget of $3 billion. So, and $500 million is on the jail. And 70% of the people in the jail, I'll say this again, 70% of the people in the jail are there for nonviolent offenses of the kind that I just talked about. Possession, shoplifting, burglary, prostitution.
And when there's diversion programs that are not only less expensive but more effective, and this is, again, why it really is a pleasure to work with a president like you. These are the directions that we need to go because, our job isn't just about balancing a budget. You have the ability, and we have the ability to really impact people's lives through the policies that we set. So, I was personally happy because I've been doing some work on the diversion issue, but to see you proactively working out and speaking out with the new police chief, with the mayor, to talk about the fact that we need to step back. For so long, it's been almost like a political third rail that nobody wanted to talk about this fact. It's not about being soft on crime. It's about being smart on crime.
Well, it's about intelligent use of public resources and dealing with a public health crisis in a reasonable and responsible way. And dealing with a public health crisis by incarcerating people doesn't make any sense at all.
Joe, this may be a good time for you just to talk briefly. You have a judicial advisory council that I know is doing some significant work on these issues as well. I don't know, Kurt, you want to speak to this, or President?
Well, there is a judicial advisory council, and it is our vehicle for bringing together all the people in the criminal justice system. So that's the public defender who's in the president's office, the state's attorney, the sheriff, the chief judge, the judicial arm, bringing all of them together to try to talk about some of these issues and figure out how we're going to address them, as you point out, in a smarter way. It's not being soft on crime, it's being smart. Kurt, you want to add?
Well, I would just say this is an entity that in the last 4 years really hasn't been active at all. What we've tried to do not only is put new talent in, but we're also putting a new council together. It includes a couple judges, some attorneys, and advocates for more efficient justice. And what this group does, in addition to advise the president on policy, is help find funding for things like diversion programming, work with the sheriff, work with the state's attorney, work with the chief judge to get the resources in place to address these issues.
And I think, you know, what we're getting at here, is the resources are probably in place right now. They're just being misdirected. And we really have to get everybody kind of pulling in the same direction right now, saying there's a better way for us to be doing this. But I think it's great that we're getting that way and that you're able to get the public kind of rallying support behind that. Talking about public support again, one more time, if you do have any questions, please feel free to tweet them to us with the Tell Tony hashtag, TELLTONI, or through the website if you're watching this online right now. You hit the IM button and submit a question that way as well. Next question kind of branches off from the last one somewhat. It's from Amisha, who submitted this one. She's in Chicago. President Presswinkle, considering the current state of the Cook County budget, coupled with the rise in community violence, what does the county plan to do to create a more safe place for its residents? And it's kind of a tricky question, because I think people, you know, they see kind of Cook County encompassing all the city and countless suburbs as well, but all those towns really have their own patchwork really of laws and enforcement. So what are your thoughts on what we can do as a county to have kind of a safer, more stable community?
Well, this is an example of city-county collaborations. This summer there was an anti-violence initiative, which was a joint city and county effort, and it got tremendous support from our philanthropic community as well. And we focused on three things. Ceasefire, which is an organization which attempts to work in communities to organize them to reduce violence. And in particular, they have staff who are called interrupters, people who try to calm the waters when there's a violent situation. And when violence does take place, they try to mitigate the kind of cycle of revenge that often goes on. Somebody's hurt by one group, and then those folks go back and, you know, take it out on the offenders, and it's a cycle of violence. So one of the things we did was support Ceasefire and its efforts to reduce violence in our neighborhoods. The second thing we did was try to provide more jobs for young people. You know, if you can keep young people engaged in productive activities, they're less likely to be out on the street and in trouble. And the third thing was to try to find sports activities to engage young people. And in this case, it was young people who had some involvement in the juvenile justice system. So we picked 4 or 5 communities in the four communities in the city of Chicago. I think Kurt knows them better than I do, and focused on them. And again, it was ceasefire, an effort to reduce the violence and take action when there were violent acts to try to keep the violence from I want to say accelerating, but escalating. That's the word I want. Thank you. Escalating, providing summer jobs for as many kids as we possibly could, and engaging kids in sports activities. Kurt, do you want to talk a little bit more about it? Because I think you remember the 4 communities that were involved too.
Yes, the 4 communities were Inglewood, Woodlawn, Little Village, and Garfield Park. And, you know, you should note that the job piece of the programming for the summer, we created and employed over 500 youth this summer at over 100 different employers, and we targeted those efforts in those 4 communities. It was also done in conjunction with the University of Chicago Crime Lab, who's going to take the data from the violence in those 4 communities amongst youth, and what we see this summer, and they'll report out and see, what we can replicate in more communities in future summers.
Well, especially when we look at our benefits, we're not just talking about reducing violence, we're also talking about maybe starting somebody down with a trade or career or vocation, getting a sense of structure, somewhere to be. So it provides a lot of functions. The issue of jobs on everybody's mind these days. I know you just had a recent announcement about job creation in Cook County. Maybe I think people would like to know a little bit about what we're doing to help create jobs, not just for youth, but with businesses and employers in Cook County.
Right. Well, one of the first things I promised on the campaign trail is that we would focus more on economic development than the county had in the past. So we created a Bureau of Economic Development and combined our workforce initiatives, capital planning, community development, building, and zoning. So we brought together 4 disparate departments that clearly have related functions and put them in our Bureau of Economic Development. And Maria Saldana and Herman Brewer have led that initiative, and I'm very grateful to them. So we put together this Bureau of Economic Development, and we are focusing more on trying to work with the business community and trying to work with the other groups that are looking at regional economic development. So that's the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, CMAP, Metropolis 2020, the Metropolitan Planning Council. There are a number of those kinds of organizations that looked at regional development that the county had not been involved in the past, or only been minimally involved. So we created a new bureau. We're involved in the other agencies that are looking at economic development. And today we had a press conference at the Hill Group in Franklin Park, and we talked about one of our tax incentives, Class 6B tax incentives, that enabled this company to purchase property and expand their operations. They're going to be hiring more workers. This is a company that does prefabrication of buildings. So they put together the component parts. And we're used in this country to stick-built homes and buildings. You build everything on the site. But more and more construction is moving toward whole segments of the building being assembled in what are basically manufacturing plants and then delivered by truck or rail to the site and then assembled there. And this is a company that's doing that kind of cutting-edge construction work and was able to expand as a result of the Class 6B tax incentives that we provided to them. So that's the kind of work that we need to do more of, look for those opportunities to provide incentives, and we also have to work more closely with the business community, all aspects of it, not just manufacturing, but retail, all segments.
I think that that one story just illustrates, because it's not just the dozens of new jobs that were being created by their expansion, the construction jobs, there were dozens of construction jobs, and keeping hundreds of jobs, literally just in this one case, in Cook County, rather than having them go to a neighboring county or work at a neighboring stadium.
Right. One of the things that staff was asked at the press conference was, had they considered other sites? And they had considered a dozen other sites outside of Cook County before we were able to persuade them that the Class 6B tax incentives would really provide them with the opportunity to expand right where they were.
We've got a question from Shelley, and Shelley says, you're using technology tonight to communicate with your constituents. How do you feel about accelerating broadband access to help serve underserved communities and help them get access to the Internet? Now, I think a lot of that really falls with the ICC at the state level. But I think from a policy level, at least at the city and county, it's more about getting them into neighborhoods through libraries or just having affordable access, no?
Actually, you probably know more about this than I do, because it's something I know you've worked on. So why don't you speak to it a little bit, and then we'll talk about it.
Well, I think the policy here, the fact that we're able to do this today, and I'll tell you, in my 16 years in public office, I haven't seen an office like the one under President Preckwinkle just grab the reins and understand that technology is changing. I want to give credit to a man that was smart enough to sit off camera today, Greg Loss, our Chief Information Officer. But the President's really adopted technology and what we have to do here, whether it's doing an online town hall meeting, whether it's the various outreach during the Twitter accounts, online through social media, to really help communicate and break down the barriers between yourself and your constituents and get information to their hands, whether it's providing them information about what's going on in the forest preserves, job opportunities, your schedule, what events you're going to be at, what we're doing at the county board. And that's important. And as we work to kind of harness technology, you want to use it for getting something specific done. And in the role of being a county board president or a county commissioner, that role is just being able to give you more access to your elected officials. I've always maintained that, that relationship should be a horizontal one, not a vertical one. And I think that the things that you're doing and embracing are really setting a good model, not just for your contemporaries now, but for people going forward in the future.
Let me just add a couple things. First of all, Commissioner Fritchie, as we organized the Board of Commissioners this year, volunteered to be chair of our information technology initiatives. So it's on the basis of his experience in Springfield and his own personal interest that he's gotten really involved in this as a commissioner, as a new commissioner. Let me ask Kurt to add a little bit from our side about what's going on here, and I really appreciate your preface that kind of gave people a context.
Well, one of the things that you prefaced is the work of our CIO, Greg Wass, who's the former CIO as Chief Information Officer for the state of Illinois. And one of the things that he's been working on with the new Bureau of Economic Development is how we can, through policy, through planning, and through advocacy, work with communities that are underserved when it comes to broadband access. There are some substantial opportunities that Greg and Maria Saldana have been working on in the south suburbs, especially where we can leverage opportunities through the rail that's out there, as you know, the fiber that's out there that can be extended with coordination through the planning agencies out there, the state of Illinois certainly, and the leadership of the county board president. It's exciting because we see the opportunity, and really there hasn't been this kind of planning in place before. So we're looking forward to what's going to come from that.
If you joined us late, we're here for an online town hall meeting with Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle. We're joined by the Budget Director Andrew Gibson, as well as the President's Chief of Staff Kurt Summers. I'm Cook County Commissioner John Fritchie. Here's an interesting question from Carter that submitted this via Twitter. It's one that's unique to you, and I think you probably got the same question that I got at the time, which was, why would you possibly go to Cook County? But what Carter's specific question was, what are the biggest differences and what have been the biggest challenges transitioning from being an alderman to Cook County Board President?
Well, I had been an alderman for almost 20 years and loved my job, but was frankly looking for other opportunities. And it was clear to me that my predecessor was not going to be reelected. And the question in my mind was there anybody out there who was a potential candidate who was going to care as much about the mission of the county, which is public health and criminal justice? That's where 2/3 of our money goes. A little less than 1/3 to public health, and a little more than 1/3 to criminal justice. Was there anybody out there who cared as much about those issues as I did? And I concluded that, first of all, I was the person who was a potential candidate who was most committed to those things, and that I had a good chance to win. So we spent from December of 2008 to February of 2010 campaigning, and I was fortunate enough to be the victor in the Democratic primary. This is a very different kind of job. When you're an alderman, it's very much hands-on. You have a relatively small staff. You do a lot of constituent service yourself. As an executive of a county that has 5.2 million people, you don't quite have that same ability to do things hands-on. I have a staff, and I'm very grateful for all the good people who have come to work for the county. But the challenges you face are these big issues that face our society these days, which is how we're going to provide health care for as many of us as possible, and how we're going to be smarter about crime. After decades of thinking that, the answer to our public safety issues is just to throw as many people as possible in jail, and clearly that hasn't worked.
What would you say has been the biggest surprise, either good or bad, since you've come over from City Council?
I was asked that earlier today, and I guess I would say, I'm not sure it's the biggest surprise, but it surely is the thing that has brought me the most satisfaction. There have been a lot of wonderful people, two of whom are right here with me. Kurt Summers, my Chief of Staff, and Andrea Gibson. Our Budget Director, Greg Wass, is here, and there are a number of other staff people. Neil Carey, who's our Policy Director. If I mention everybody, Jesse Neves, who's our Director of Communications. Samira Dali, who's our scheduler. Did I get everybody who's in the room? a lot of good people have been willing to come and work at the county. And in the past, when people thought about public service, they thought, frankly, about maybe the city or the state, but the county wasn't really on their radar screen. So I'm grateful that we've been able to kind of ratchet up the county government in the public mind and induce a lot of good people to come and work here. That's the only way we're really going to make change, is if we can attract really talented people to help us work on reform.
Well, and I think we're seeing those changes. I don't know that there's ever been a time, and I know I enjoy being at public meetings saying, I work for Cook County now. We're the ones that are cutting taxes and making government more efficient right now. And there was a lot of times that Cook County, I think, was looked at kind of as the stepchild of public service here. And I think it is a testament not just to the direction that you're leading this in. But I don't want to give you too many compliments tonight, but to you as well.
That's okay. Keep on.
You've been able to attract and pull in the folks from the private sector, from the city, from the state, because they realize that we're really at a turning point in county government. And, it's so nice to be out in the public. And, people have complaints these days, as they always do. But by and by, people are saying, hey, it's great to see good things happening at Cook County. When we talk about things happening at Cook County, you're about 9 months into your term right now. Are there still big picture objectives that you see in the short term that you want to start to go after?
Well, right after we finished our first budget at the end of February, we began to work on performance management. And I'm going to let Kurt speak to this. But, county government was, I started to say years, but maybe it's decades behind the times. Nobody had done any performance management work previously. And performance management is pretty simple. You figure out what you want to do and how you're going to measure your progress. What milestones are you going to set up? What time frames are you going to give yourself to accomplish, your objective? So we have been working on performance management, not just in the President's office, but with all the separately elected officials. And 10 out of the 11 have been working with us, so that's pretty impressive. To figure out, department by department, agency by agency, elective office by elective office, what's your mission? What are you trying to do? What are you going to measure that proves up that you're being successful at what you're trying to do? And let me let Kurt speak to this. We call it Set Targets, Achieve Results. It's our STAR initiative.
Yeah, so I think you covered it pretty well. But
but you can add something.
I'll add something. The reason why is because on a weekly basis, for an hour and a half, I bring in a couple departments, and we go through how they're performing. We go through what data they track that tells them and tells the president and tells the public how they're doing in terms of serving the residents of the county. This hasn't happened before. There wasn't a metric, a measure, a goal in place that said, here's what the public should be holding us accountable for, and here's how I'm performing against that. And if we were to make these policy changes, these budget priority changes, I could serve the people of the county that much better. So it's only now that we're really beginning to get through the process of doing that. Most all departments are now participating, I think, seeing the benefits of it. We couldn't have gotten there, obviously, without the President's leadership, but I'd also say we had tremendous help from the Civic Consulting Alliance and from the Boston Consulting Group on a pro bono basis, who helped us put this entire framework together.
And these are groups that tend to work in the private sector more often than not, and that's really what we're trying to do now, saying how can we measure what we're getting for taxpayer dollars? I think people should recognize that the size of Cook County's budget, if we were a state, we'd be the 15th or 16th largest state in the country. So we're talking about a significant budget, and making sure those dollars are being well spent. We're running low on time. I want to try to get a couple more questions in. A number of people have either tweeted in or IM'd in questions about layoffs and furloughs. Do you anticipate there being some both going into the next budget cycle?
We have a $315 million shortfall. And what I said from the very beginning is it was going to be difficult to close that gap without layoffs. But let me let Andrea speak again to the ways in which we're trying to close the gap.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, we've received budget requests in from departments. We're reviewing them right now. We are trying to maximize our opportunities on procurement, whether we're getting discounts on things, whether we're leveraging savings by a city-county collaboration, whether we're tagging on to another contract. We're looking at a lot of non-personnel items, but inevitably when 80% of your expenses are personnel, you have to look there too, and you have to look at where you can do things more efficiently with your people. And there are some vacant positions in the budget. I would think that would be where one area we would look at first. Furlough days would require agreement from the unions to participate in. Right now there are 10 furlough days for many county employees, 5 government shutdown days and 5 furlough days. So those things are on the table. We just don't know the scale of what we would be proposing yet with the budget.
You know, if I could just add one thing really quickly, I think oftentimes when governments look at cost reduction, you think about headcount reduction as a natural question. And as the President said, that could very well be inevitable. But there are a number of opportunities that labor leaders and others have brought to us where we are currently going outside for things that can be brought in house cheaper, and we're going to look as hard at those opportunities, which would create more jobs, frankly, for people who are currently part of the system or could retain jobs.
I was going to add one thing. You know, we've invited our labor unions to come in and go over the budget with us line by line and give us suggestions on how we can save money and do things more efficiently. So we've offered our unions, our labor representatives, the opportunity to work very, very closely with us as we put this budget together to minimize layoffs.
I was going to say that I think you can look at our situation the same way that a lot of households right now. They're making difficult decisions. There's some decisions you may not want to make. There's some that don't feel good to make, but tough times require tough decisions and leadership to make ends meet. I know the one thing that people do want to see us do is close our budget deficit, not raise taxes, be more efficient, and doing all these things and meeting those goals requires some tough choices sometimes.
That's true, and as you point out, you know, government is under the same pressure as our families, and just as families have to make tough decisions, so are we going to have to make.
We're starting to run out of time. I want to thank again, though, our host, Microsoft, for allowing us to use the Technology Center to make this online town hall meeting possible. And we are going to have, and I'll let the President talk about Thursday's hearing again. Let's just leave you with one more question, though, from me, and then I'll let you give your closing remarks. Are you enjoying the job so far?
Most days. Most days. You know, I can't imagine a job that you would enjoy every single day, because there's always going to be those days where you wonder, you know, why did I get out of bed? But it's been a real challenge and a lot of fun, and I have been, as I said, pleased that so many good people have been willing to come and be part of our efforts at reform. I want to thank you, Commissioner Fritchie, for your good work in the Board of Commissioners and for being our moderator tonight. And I'd like to thank Microsoft for making this facility available to us so that we could host this online town hall. And I'd like to invite those of you who wish to come on Thursday. We're starting at 6:30, Kurt?
Yeah.
So 6:30 at 69 West Washington in the basement?
Downstairs by the Pedway.
Downstairs by the Pedway. 69 West Washington, Thursday, day after tomorrow, at 6:30 in the evening. There'll be a real live in-person town hall meeting, and you're welcome to come. We hope that you will join us. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Once again, on behalf of Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, Chief of Staff Kurt Summers, Budget Director Andrea Gibson, and Cook County Commissioner John Fritchie. President, we're going to do this again, right?
Sure enough.
Until next time, thank you for joining us tonight.